Greetings! Welcome to another episode of Porygondolier. Recently, I've been making time for the Pokemon Red map randomizer, and in today's installment, I thought I'd go through a few of the changes I've made, bringing it up to version 2. And I'm also very excited to tell you about how you can get involved if you'd like to, and also I have an exciting announcement about the next part of this project. So first of all, I'd like to say a massive thank you to everyone that played one of the 5 randomized patches I put out back in 2023. Thanks to the comments I received, I've been able to fix a good number of scenarios that might occur as a result of the randomization. Let's start by talking about one-way warps. Now, just to be clear, when talking about map randomization, there are a couple of different things I describe as one-way. One such example is the 4 gates with the thirsty guards. These are one-way in the sense that, if the guards are still thirsty when you pass through, you can get stuck on the other side. These scenarios were broadly dealt with already in the original map randomizer, and I talked about them in my behind the scenes video linked up in the corner there. The kind of one-ways I want to discuss now are the other kind, the warps that are quite literally one way. Namely, the verge in the power plant that is usually a shortcut to get back outside after catching the best bird, or the verge in the Pokemon Mansion. There's also one location in the Seafoam Islands that I wrongly included in this category, which is the surfing warp between the B3 and B4 floors of the cave. Since there's a strong current here, I was under the impression that you could never go back through this one, but in actual fact, apart from the Articuno boulder puzzle, there's actually a second puzzle here that you can use to slow the flow. Nevertheless, this is a one-way junction until the boulder puzzle is solved, so perhaps it might be better to put it in the category with the thirsty guards. The original decision I arrived at for these 3 cases was to put them in their own little group, and randomise the 3 destination warps within this tiny pool. But as a couple of players have told me, warping to B4 of the Seafoam Islands when not surfing results in getting stuck. You can surf here to proceed as normal, but this could be considered a kind of soft lock if you don't have surf, so it's no good. So firstly, what I've decided to do is not randomise the Seafoam Islands B3 to B4 connection at all. This is more in keeping with how I've treated holes in the Seafoam Islands, which are not randomised at all. This was largely to allow the Seafoam Island puzzles to be completed without a boatload of frustration. The staircases and entrances are of course randomised, but if you can find your way to the boulders and you have strength, you don't even really need surf, then you will be able to solve the puzzle in the usual way. Assuming you didn't have surf, you might get stuck on Articuno Island. This might be frustrating, but it could also be considered a kind of punishment for trying to capture Articuno without the ability to surf. How dare you! You can still catch Articuno, but you'll need to find a way to escape. You can of course do this with an escape rope or by using dig, or if push comes to shove, you might have to black out. As for the actual one-way verges, since there are only 2 now, there doesn't seem to be much to gain by modelling them up, but having them send you to the outside of their respective buildings as usual feels a bit too kind. After all, it's very unlikely you actually entered the power plant through its normal entrance. So in the power plant, it'll now send you to the inside entrance of the building instead. From there, you can choose to go back to wherever. I consider the same for the mansion, but if you arrived here, you can't actually walk back to the main entrance. So warping there feels a bit too kind. And so, it would seem that as part of the devastation caused to the region by the randomization, additional rubble has fallen, blocking the verge completely. The next fix I'd like to talk about revolves around everyone's favourite cycling-only road. A place where dismounting from your bicycle is an offence so grave the developers went out of their way to create a flag which disables the use of the bike from your item menu. Of course, while on cycling path, this works to prevent you getting off. But if this flag was still set while you were walking, yeah, you're told you can't get off a bicycle, you're not even riding. As it turns out, this problem occurs because the forced bicycle flag only gets cleared when you leave through one of the 2 gates that is supposed to sandwich the path. Or indeed, it's also cleared when you fly away, teleport away, or black out. So by leaving bicycle path not through the normal gates, but instead through, say, Sabrina's gym, the flag remains set, and we can't use the bicycle. I thought about solutions to this problem for a while, and came up with a very simple proposition. In the first place, it's the guards either side of the path that are enforcing the use of wheels. If we're entering the path from somewhere else, which most likely we are, then really there's no reason we should be forced to ride a bicycle at all. So I've set it up so that we can now choose our own mode of transport. Be it bicycle or feet, you're free to do it your way. Sadly though, the player is too young to drive a truck. Now, the game contains a number of warps that can't be entered before meeting some kind of requirement. For example, we need a secret key to enter Blaine's gym, an SS ticket to reach the boat, and 7 badges to go in here. Well, usually anyway. I took this one out after it caused issues in my last playthrough. But in general, barring one, all of these have one thing in common. After we gain access, we keep that access for the rest of the game. Unless of course we do something intentional, like depositing the secret key. But the SSN is a bit different. We start the game with no access. We get the ticket, and after robbing the captain's back, the boat leaves. And barring a glitch and an oversight, we can't normally get back in. For a randomized map, this presents a bit of a problem. I mean, we could be careful to ensure that this warp doesn't lead anywhere important, but losing access to anywhere... There's an aeroplane. Can you not aeroplane over me when I'm trying to record? Goodness gracious me. Could you fly a little faster, please? Oh, it wasn't an aeroplane, it was power tools. Right, let's carry on. Sure, we can ensure that this warp doesn't lead anywhere important, but losing access to anywhere isn't really ideal, and unnecessarily complicates the already quite convoluted map linking algorithm. But here's the thing, the Kanto region is meant to be in a state of uproar. Its inhabitants are confused and probably a little scared. Does this really seem like a good time to be setting sail for the open sea? Who knows where they might end up? I think you can see where I'm going with this. The SSN no longer leaves in this version of the game. Next up is entrance fees. There are 2 locations in the game that charge you money to go in, the Safari Zone and the museum. There's a good chance you already know about this, but the potential soft lock of having run out of money and not being able to access the Safari Zone to get surf was concerning enough for Game Freak that they made the receptionist kinder in Pokemon Yellow, such that it'll let you in even if you're strapped for cash. Incidentally, in Pokemon Blue, you could always catch a Meowth and use Payday to earn your entry fee. But with no Meowth in Red version without trading, I suppose there is a legitimate case for calling this a soft lock, as there's no guarantee you'd have a friend with Pokemon Blue. Or, you know, any friends at all. Nevertheless, for this to actually happen, you'd need to have no items to sell and no more to collect. And also, no more trainers left to fight in the accessible parts of the map. It's extremely unlikely, and I personally think that rather than letting trainers in for free, kids ought to be punished for doing an absolutely dreadful job of their financial planning. Maybe that's a bit harsh, I'm not sure, but I'm going way off on a tangent here. The point is, yes, there's a potential soft lock here, particularly in Red version, and due to the randomized nature of the map, the museum entry fee is now also a problem too. So it's a simple case of adding the code from Pokemon Yellow, right? Well, yes, but that's not what I've done. As with the SSN and Bicycle Path, there's an on-theme reason here to just remove the fee altogether. The Safari Zone receptionist tells us that he doesn't know where the door leads to, so he'd feel bad taking our money. He's kind, but in a way that's fair to everyone. Likewise, over in the museum, entry is now free of charge, because the stairs that lead to the second floor most likely don't. So these are some of the fixes I've implemented in V2. There's a number of small bug fixes I've made as well that I won't cover here, but these are documented in the release notes. Now I'd like to talk about what's new. One of the themes for V2 is that the residents of the Kanto region are more aware of what is going on, and at the end of the video I'll speak briefly about how you can actually get involved in fleshing out this idea. There's one character in the game though that makes things quite confusing. Actually there's 2, but Giovanni will have to wait. Our rival, who I like to call John, is somebody we can battle as many as 8 times throughout the playthrough, but the team he uses to battle us depends only on the location in which we meet him, rather than being arranged in chronological order. This means we can meet Johnny 5 and beat his Pidgeot, before losing to Bridge John with his Sand Attack Pidgeotto. I wasn't sure what to do with this. On the one hand, we could think of John as part of the furniture, or part of the world that has been randomized. We could also think of him as a player in his own right, that is also traversing the randomized Kanto region. In this case, each time we meet him, his team ought to get stronger. I asked my viewers which John they'd like to see in the game, and while the preference was there for the sentient, chronological John, there were also a good number of votes for the John I'm calling Furniture John. So what to do? Well, you can choose. When starting a new game, after naming your rival John, or another inferior name, Oak will ask you an odd question. If you respond yes, John will be stronger each time you meet him. Answering no will give you more or less the vanilla John experience as with V1. I say more or less as I've made a couple of small changes that you can read about in the release notes, and I've also included all the logic used for Sentient John. The next new feature is lifts, or elevators if you prefer. In V1, all of the lifts are out of order. This was a deliberate decision to keep the randomizer simple, and I also felt that the inclusion of lifts, particularly the Sylph Co lift with 11 destinations, would result in playthroughs that are very elevator focused. But on reflection, I think it's too early to decide, so I've added new logic to the map randomizer itself, allowing us to toggle lifts on and off before generating the network of warps. This includes the Celadon Mart lift and also the Sylph Co. Currently, the Rocket Hideout lift is not supported. This is because of the lift key requirement that I'd like to keep in the game, but this adds on quite a lot of complexity. I plan to address this in a future release. The next part of this video concerns the back-end workings of the map randomizer itself. I'm probably going to get very much overly technical with my explanation of how things have changed, so if that's not really your thing, I'd encourage you to jump to the next chapter. Right, I described this more thoroughly in my previous video on how the map randomizer works, but here's the basic principle of the algorithm. First off, it makes these connections shown on your screen. These don't get randomized. Now it takes all the other points in what I call Overworld Group 99 and starts to connect them to other points on the map. By continuously looking for new points to link into the established network, it ensures that the entire map is linked up. We don't end up with little pocket networks that can't be reached. I call this routine Smart Linker, and the reason it's smart is that it's pretty careful about which points can connect to each other. For example, dead ends connecting to dead ends is a no-no. As I mentioned in my previous video, there was a risk that the network could get completed prematurely. The final rule I mentioned for linking points has one important objective. Prevent a scenario where all open nodes of the network get connected to a dead end, meaning that there are no longer any points left to connect to. A really simple example of this would be a dead end connected to a gate with 2 warp points connected to another dead end. None of the previously mentioned rules explicitly prevent this from happening. To overcome this, the final rule keeps track of the number of available points. That is, non-linked points in active groups. For example, if we start with the Celadon group and 12 of its points get connected to dead ends, there is only one available point left. In this case, we must not connect to a dead end, as this will result in the network being completed prematurely. The macro keeps track of the number of available points to prevent this from happening. So by preventing dead ends from being linked up, I thought I'd solve this problem, but as it turns out, there's another scenario that causes the same issue. Suppose we have a network like this. There are currently 2 available points in the network to connect to, and SmartLinker picks this point to join to something new. Now, there's another point available over here, so linking to a dead end is okay. Of course, linking to a path or a hub is also fine. But what if it decides to link to this point over here? By connecting the only 2 available points in the network to one another, we go from 2 open points to none in a single catastrophic step. This might seem like a rare scenario, but from my testing, I found that this is quite likely to happen when the network is almost finished, and there are only a few points left to connect. So I added some logic to prevent this from happening, and the effect on how the macro runs was immediately noticeable. Previously in V1, I could expect a good number of failed attempts at making a network before it finally arrived at a valid solution. With this new logic, it quite often gets there on the first attempt. In fact, this one change had it arriving at solutions on average 4 times faster than V1. This is great news, as eventually I'd like to turn this into an online tool, and it'd be nice if users didn't have to wait several minutes to get their patch. In fact, the performance was so much better I decided to reverse the decision I made in V1 and actually made it a little worse again. There were a few overworld groups in V1 that I decided to merge together through map editing. This was done purely to help the randomizer, but as of V2, this is no longer necessary. Currently though, we do still get the card key at the beginning of the game to allow various Sylph co-groups to be considered merged. Perhaps I'll be able to do something about this in a future version. The next change I made is to do with a particular frustration I found in some of the randomized ROMs. Imagine you're in Cerulean City. Wow, why is everything so colourful? You enter the Pokemon Center and arrive in Diglett's tunnel. You traverse your way to the other side, defeating Diglets along the way. And eventually, you reach the ladder and come out in this gate. So we go through and arrive in Mount Moon. This sequence of paths goes on for a while, when where should we end up but a dead end, and not even a very useful one. Assuming we have no means of teleporting back, we now need to walk all the way back to Cerulean City. Not great. So to reduce the chance of this kind of network being generated, I added a coin flip that triggers every time it tries to join a path to another path. It doesn't outright prevent path-to-path connections, it just makes them a bit less likely. I created a few networks with and without this and crunched the numbers, and it does seem to have made a positive impact. Ah, that's better. Good old blue Cerulean. So that just about covers the major updates to SmartLinker. But there is also a pretty big improvement to the other important part of the system called Path Checker. Path Checker runs after SmartLinker completes and ensures that a number of key items can be obtained without going through one-way junctions such as the Thirsty Guards. It wouldn't be much good if you needed to wake up Snorlax in order to get the Pokeflute. In V1, Path Checker isn't picky about which one-way junctions get in the way. Perhaps you can get the secret key very early in the game, but Path Checker might have declared a map unplayable because the SS ticket is behind a seemingly locked door. This was quite wasteful, as Path Checker would dispose of perfectly good maps. The main difference now is implementation of a kind of lock and key system. As Path Checker goes through the network, each time it reaches a key, for example the Sylph Scope, the corresponding lock, in this case the stairs with Marowak, are no longer considered an obstacle. Not only does this lead to less failed maps, it can also lead to slightly more difficult maps, where you may have to obtain certain key items in a random sequence. As of V2, with the exception of Cut in Celadon's gym, you'll still be able to reach every location without using HMs. But in a future version, I think I'd like to use a variation of this lock and key logic to factor in not only HMs, but also the Old Man in Viridian, the Eastern Snorlax, and the badge checks on Route 23. Oh, and also this guy that really wants us to battle Brock, although I'm not sure Brock is here. I'd now like to welcome back anyone that skipped the technical chapter for the exciting announcement promised at the beginning of the video. Yes, Pokemon Yellow with random maps is now in development. I look forward to sharing a special playthrough video in due course. If it's already out, I'll have it linked to the end of this video. If you'd like to try out the new map randomized red and blue, I'll have 3 patches without lifts and 3 with in the doobly-doo. And if you'd like to get involved in these projects, there are 2 ways you can, and your input would be very much appreciated. Firstly, I have a Google form linked down below where you can submit ideas for new text to be spoken by NPCs. The idea is that each NPC in the game might have their own reaction to the randomization, and I'd like to reflect that in their dialogue. Extra points if you come up with something funny. There's also a field to enter your name or handle if you'd like to appear in the in-game credits of a future version. Secondly, I'm looking for testers to try out V2 and report any bugs on the Porygondolier's Discord. Each tester will get their own unique randomized patch to use, but this will run for a limited time. Up-to-date details will be in the doobly-doo. And as always, I'd like to wish you a wonderful day, and I look forward to welcoming you back to another video soon. For now, bye!